Magnolia Springs, Mississippi, shimmered in the heat. Spanish moss hung heavy from ancient oaks, casting long shadows on the grand estates. None were grander than Hathaway Manor, home to the formidable widow, Mrs. Eleanor Hathaway. Her late husband, a cotton tycoon, had left her with an empire and an unyielding belief in her own superiority. She surveyed the world from her veranda, her heart as cold as the iced tea she sipped. Life in Magnolia Springs revolved around people like Mrs. Hathaway. They dictated the rhythm of the town, their wealth a stark contrast to the poverty that clung to its edges. One sweltering afternoon, a shattering incident ripped through the town's tranquility. Young Thomas, a bright but impoverished African-American boy, was seen running from the general store, his eyes wide with fear. Moments later, the shopkeeper lay dead, his cash register empty. Mrs. Hathaway, witnessing the scene from afar, jumped to a conclusion. Eleanor Hathaway was not just a wealthy widow. She was a pillar of the community, her influence extending far beyond her estate. In her youth, she had been the belle of every ball, her charm and beauty captivating the elite of the South. Her relationships with the town's officials and prominent families were built on mutual respect and a shared vision of maintaining the town's status quo. She hosted lavish parties where decisions that shaped the town were often made over glasses of fine bourbon and mint juleps. But beneath her genteel exterior lay a woman fiercely protective of her legacy and unafraid to wield her power to maintain it. Her word carried weight in Magnolia Springs, and her accusations could alter the course of lives. As she watched the chaos unfold, Mrs. Hathaway's mind was already set on what she believed to be the truth, unaware of the unexpected turn her accusation would soon take. The accusation spread through Magnolia Springs like wildfire. Fear, suspicion, and the ugliness of prejudice poisoned the air. Mrs. Hathaway, wielding her influence like a weapon, demanded justice. "That boy is a menace," she declared, her voice echoing in the hushed parlor rooms of the town's elite. The white community, blinded by their bias and Mrs. Hathaway's social standing, readily accepted her version of events. They saw Thomas not as a child, but as a threat, his poverty and skin color a mark of guilt in their eyes. The courtroom, meant to be a sanctuary of justice, became a stage for their prejudice. Thomas, barely a teenager, stood accused in a system rigged against him. He had no voice, no power, and no one to speak for him. His pleas of innocence fell on deaf ears, drowned out by the chorus of condemnation led by Mrs. Hathaway. The trial was a sham, a mere formality in the eyes of the town's elite. Despite the overwhelming tide of prejudice, whispers of doubt began to surface. Sarah, a young white woman who had often seen Thomas reading beneath the old oak tree, couldn't reconcile the boy she knew with the crime he was accused of. She remembered his gentle nature, his love for stories, his infectious laughter. She confided in her father, the town's doctor, a kind man known for his fairness. He listened patiently, his brow furrowed with concern. He had treated both Thomas and the deceased shopkeeper, and he too harbored doubts. Driven by their conscience and a sense of unease, Sarah and her father began to investigate. They spoke to townsfolk, revisited the scene of the crime, and pieced together details that didn't align with the prosecution's narrative. Their investigation, however, was met with resistance. People were afraid to question Mrs. Hathaway's version of events, fearing social ostracization and economic repercussions. Thomas sat in his cell, the weight of his impending execution heavy on his young shoulders. The cold, damp walls seemed to close in on him, suffocating him with despair. He had seen the hatred in the eyes of the jury, the satisfaction on Mrs. Hathaway's face. He knew that in their eyes he was already condemned. The guards, hardened by years of witnessing human misery, treated him with indifference bordering on cruelty. They saw him as just another guilty soul, another statistic in a system designed to punish rather than rehabilitate. Hope, once a flickering flame within him, dwindled with each passing day. His only solace was the memory of his mother, her love a beacon in the darkness. He clung to the memory of her gentle touch, her soothing voice, her unwavering belief in his innocence. It was this memory that kept him going, fueling his desire to fight for his life, even when all hope seemed lost. Sarah and her father worked tirelessly, gathering evidence, interviewing witnesses, and searching for any shred of information that could clear Thomas's name. Their investigation led them to the fringes of Magnolia Springs, where they uncovered a network of secrets and lies. They discovered that the shopkeeper had been deeply in debt, owing money to dangerous individuals. They found witnesses who had seen a suspicious man lurking near the store on the day of the robbery, a man who fit the description of one of the shopkeeper's creditors. The evidence, though circumstantial, pointed towards a different perpetrator, one whose motives were far more compelling than those of a young boy with no history of violence. Armed with their findings, they approached the sheriff, a man torn between his duty to uphold the law and his loyalty to the town's power structure. He listened to their evidence, his face etched with a mixture of skepticism and concern. The thought of reopening the case, of challenging Mrs. Hathaway's accusations, filled him with trepidation. But Sarah and her father were persistent, their passion for justice unwavering. The sheriff, torn between his duty and the town's expectations, made a difficult choice. He agreed to review the evidence presented by Sarah and her father, though he warned them not to get their hopes up. The wheels of justice, once set in motion, were notoriously difficult to stop. Time was running out for Thomas. The execution date loomed, casting a long shadow over Magnolia Springs. The town was a cauldron of emotions: fear, doubt, anger, and a growing sense of unease. Sarah and her father, despite the odds stacked against them, refused to give up hope. They spent countless hours poring over the evidence, interviewing witnesses, and trying to piece together the puzzle of what truly transpired on that fateful day. The sheriff, moved by their unwavering commitment and the weight of the evidence they presented, began his own quiet investigation. The more he dug, the more he realized that the truth had been buried beneath layers of prejudice and assumption. News of the investigation, though kept largely under wraps, reached Thomas's mother. She clung to this flicker of hope as a drowning man clings to a lifeline. She had never given up on her son, never doubted his innocence, even in the darkest of moments. She made her way to Mrs. Hathaway's doorstep, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and desperation. She pleaded for an audience, her voice hoarse with emotion. She knew that Mrs. Hathaway held her son's fate in her hands. Mrs. Hathaway, seated regally in her parlor, listened with a detached air. She saw Thomas's mother not as a grieving parent, but as part of a class of people she considered beneath her. Her prejudice, deeply ingrained, blinded her to the woman's pain, her desperate plea for justice. "My son is innocent," the woman cried, her voice cracking with emotion. "Please, you must believe me. He would never hurt anyone." But Mrs. Hathaway remained unmoved. The day of Thomas's execution dawned heavy and oppressive. The town of Magnolia Springs held its breath, the air thick with anticipation. The gallows had been erected in the town square, a grim symbol of the justice that was about to be meted out. The sheriff, his face etched with a mixture of weariness and resolve, oversaw the final preparations. He had spent the night wrestling with his conscience, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. He had seen the evidence, had come to believe in Thomas's innocence, but he also knew the risks involved in challenging the town's social order. Thomas, dressed in a plain white shirt and trousers, was led from his cell and escorted to the town square. He walked with his head held high, his gaze steady, his spirit unbroken despite the ordeal he had endured. He had found strength in his innocence, in the unwavering love of his mother, and in the faintest glimmer of hope that the truth would prevail. The crowd, a sea of faces both familiar and unknown, parted as he passed. As the executioner approached, his hand hovering near the lever that would seal Thomas's fate, a commotion erupted at the back of the crowd. Sarah and her father, their faces flushed with a mixture of desperation and triumph, pushed their way through the throng, clutching a piece of paper in their hands. "Stop!" Sarah cried, her voice ringing out across the silent square. "We have proof! Thomas is innocent!" The sheriff, his heart pounding in his chest, held up his hand, signaling for the execution to be halted. He had never been so relieved to see anyone in his life. He took the paper from Sarah's trembling hand and unfolded it, his eyes scanning the contents. It was a confession, signed by the shopkeeper's creditor, admitting to the robbery and the murder. He had been apprehended in a neighboring state, and in a moment of remorse, had confessed to his crimes, clearing Thomas's name. A collective gasp arose from the crowd as the weight of the revelation sunk in. The truth so long suppressed had finally come to light. The confession sent shockwaves through Magnolia Springs. The town, so quick to judge, so eager to condemn, now had to confront the ugliness of its own prejudice. The carefully constructed walls of social order crumbled, exposing the rot that lay beneath. Mrs. Hathaway, her face pale with shock and dawning realization, watched as the truth unfolded before her eyes. The boy she had so readily condemned, the boy whose life she had held in her hands, was innocent. Her prejudices, her unwavering belief in her own righteousness, had almost cost an innocent child his life. Thomas, his legs shaking with relief, was led down from the gallows, his steps lighter now that the weight of the world had been lifted from his shoulders. He embraced his mother, their tears a mixture of joy and relief. The wheels of justice, though slow and faltering, had finally turned in the right direction. In the aftermath of the shocking revelation, the town begins to heal. Mrs. Hathaway, now a symbol of resilience, finds herself at the center of a community coming together. The once divided town starts to rebuild, with new bonds forming and old wounds beginning to mend. Faces that once held suspicion and distrust now share smiles and nods of understanding. Neighbors who had barely spoken to each other now worked side by side, rebuilding not just structures, but the very fabric of Magnolia Springs. The town square, once a place of judgment, became a hub of reconciliation and growth. Mrs. Hathaway, humbled and transformed, led initiatives to foster unity and understanding. She organized community events, bringing together people of all backgrounds to share their stories and learn from one another. Thomas, now a young man with a profound sense of justice, became an advocate for those who felt voiceless. His ordeal had given him a unique perspective, one that resonated deeply with many in the town. The journey is far from over, but hope is on the horizon. Magnolia Springs, once fractured by prejudice and fear, is now on a path toward unity and healing. Together, they move forward one step at a time towards a brighter, more inclusive future. Pause 3S. And so, in the heart of Magnolia Springs, a new chapter begins, a chapter of hope, unity, and resilience. In the aftermath of the shocking revelation, the town begins to heal. Mrs. Hathaway, now a symbol of resilience, works tirelessly to rebuild her reputation and mend the broken relationships. The community, inspired by her strength, comes together in a newfound unity. This chapter explores the journey of forgiveness, redemption, and the power of community. We see Mrs. Hathaway organizing a town hall meeting, her voice steady as she addresses her neighbors. "We must learn to forgive, not just others, but ourselves," she says, her eyes filled with determination. The room is silent, but the atmosphere is charged with a sense of collective resolve. Cut to scenes of townspeople working together on various projects. A mural being painted on the side of a building depicting the town's journey from division to unity. Children planting a community garden, their laughter filling the air as they dig into the soil. Elderly neighbors sharing stories and wisdom, their faces softening with understanding and compassion. Mrs. Hathaway visits the family of Thomas, her heart heavy with guilt but her spirit unwavering. She offers a heartfelt apology, her voice breaking as she speaks of her remorse. Thomas's mother, tears in her eyes, takes her hand and says, "We all make mistakes. It's how we move forward that matters." The camera pans to Thomas, now a young man with a profound sense of justice, speaking at a community gathering. "We must stand together, support one another, and never let fear divide us again," he declares, his words met with nods and applause. The town square, once a place of judgment, now buzzes with activity. A community fair is in full swing, with booths showcasing local talents and crafts. Laughter and music fill the air as people come together, celebrating their shared journey towards healing and unity. As the sun sets, Mrs. Hathaway stands at the edge of the town square, watching the scene with a mixture of pride and humility. She knows the road ahead will not be easy, but she also knows that they are stronger together. With a deep breath, she joins the festivities, a smile spreading across her face. And so, Magnolia Springs takes another step forward, planting the seeds of forgiveness and redemption, nurturing them with the power of community and hope. Together, they move towards a brighter, more inclusive future, one day at a time. Pause 3S. The journey is far from over, but in the heart of Magnolia Springs, a new chapter continues, a chapter of hope, unity, and resilience. In the aftermath of the shocking revelation, the town begins to heal. Mrs. Hathaway, once a figure of controversy, now finds herself at the center of a community's journey towards forgiveness and understanding. The seeds of forgiveness, once sown, begin to sprout, bringing new hope and unity to the town. Scene of Mrs. Hathaway walking through the town square, warmly greeted by neighbors. As the days pass, the residents reflect on the lessons learned and the strength found in unity. The story of Mrs. Hathaway becomes a testament to the power of truth, resilience, and the human spirit's capacity for change. Cut to scenes of townspeople engaging in acts of kindness, a young woman helping an elderly man carry groceries, children playing together, and a local artist painting a mural depicting the town's journey. Magnolia Springs, once divided by fear and doubt, now stands as a beacon of hope. The community, inspired by Mrs. Hathaway's unwavering spirit, works together to build a future founded on trust, compassion, and mutual respect. Scene of Mrs. Hathaway planting a tree in the town park, surrounded by smiling townspeople. The tree, a symbol of new beginnings, takes root just as the town's sense of unity grows stronger each day. With every passing moment, the bonds between neighbors deepen, and the scars of the past begin to fade. Cut to a sunset over Magnolia Springs, the sky painted with hues of orange and pink. As the sun sets over Magnolia Springs, a new dawn emerges. A dawn filled with promise, healing, and the unwavering belief that together they can overcome any challenge. The journey is far from over, but with each step, they move closer to a future where forgiveness and unity prevail. Scene fades to black, with the words "A New Dawn" appearing on screen. And so, the story of Mrs. Hathaway and Magnolia Springs continues, a story of hope, resilience, and the extraordinary power of community. Final fade out with gentle, hopeful music playing. As the days turn into weeks, the story of Mrs. Hathaway and Magnolia Springs continues to resonate beyond the town's borders. News of their transformation spreads, inspiring other communities facing their own struggles. Cut to scenes of neighboring towns holding community meetings and events, drawing inspiration from Magnolia Springs. Mrs. Hathaway, now an emblem of resilience and unity, is invited to share her story at various gatherings. Scene of Mrs. Hathaway speaking at a community center, her words met with nods and applause. Her journey becomes a beacon of hope, demonstrating that even the deepest divisions can be bridged with understanding and compassion. The town's newfound unity also brings about tangible changes. Cut to scenes of community projects, a new library being built, a park being renovated, and a community garden flourishing. These projects symbolize the collective effort to rebuild and grow stronger together. In the heart of Magnolia Springs, a new tradition is born. Scene of townspeople gathering in the town square, lighting lanterns and releasing them into the sky. Each year, on the anniversary of their transformation, the community comes together to celebrate their journey and reaffirm their commitment to unity and forgiveness. As the lanterns rise and illuminate the night sky, the town reflects on how far they have come. Cut to close-ups of smiling faces, young and old, united in their shared experience. The legacy of change they have created serves as a reminder that even in the face of adversity, the human spirit can triumph. The story of Mrs. Hathaway and Magnolia Springs is not just about overcoming challenges, it's about the enduring power of community and the lasting impact of love and forgiveness. Scene of Mrs. Hathaway standing under the tree she planted, looking up at the lanterns with a peaceful smile. As the lanterns disappear into the night, the town knows that their journey is far from over, but with each passing day, they move forward with the strength and unity that will guide them through whatever comes next. Final scene of the town, bathed in the gentle glow of the lanterns, transitioning to a serene night sky filled with stars. And so, the legacy of Mrs. Hathaway and Magnolia Springs lives on, a testament to the extraordinary power of change, hope, and the unwavering belief in a brighter future. Scene fades to black with the words "A Legacy of Change" appearing on screen, accompanied by gentle, uplifting music. The journey continues, and with it, the promise of a better tomorrow.